All right, my baby is last video of the day. This video is about what does commanding like a kid king look like? What does commanding like a king mean? I was watching this video. I think was a Jamaican guy who was beautifully discussing how once we within ourselves interact with the world as kings, then automatically the house that we live within starts representing itself as our kingdom. And eventually that will spread into the surroundings and the people that kind of like see you. Because ultimately it's how you engage with yourself that the people that leads people or kind of like allows people to engage with you. And so speaking about kings, I think about many different kind of like stories slash movies maybe we watched. But like let's go for this one, Game of Thrones. All of us watch Game of Thrones. And there's an episode in Game of Thrones where Tyrion, the dwarf, I don't know if we're supposed to call them little people now, but like I heard him call himself a dwarf once, and he was like, "It's fine." So he looks at his nephew supposedly, and he goes like, "A king doesn't remind people that he is king." I don't know if it's the dwarf or the grandfather who actually like makes that notes. I don't remember, but I remember it was like one of those profound moments because the king that everyone hated, what's his name? Bastard child of the brother and sister, basically kept yelling at people, "I'm the king, you do what I want. I'm the king, you do what I want." And so that's basically not really acting like a king when he was a king. But then there's the wisdom of the Tao that discusses how a true king never actually like preaches his kingdom, but in fact always humbly tries to absorb the energy basically that could go any other way and redirects it in a more positive way towards what's happening in his kingdom. A true king doesn't show off his kingdom, and a true king doesn't really like take advantage of his kingdom. And it was like kind of with the Tao, it's always like they always preach humility and how basically we are how energy transfers from one side to another is through us. And the Tao it's in itself is literally just a manifestation of life and how it's always like transferring from one point to another and everything like this. Commanding like a king, what would it look like if you were to be a king? What would it look like if you were to have advisors? Why do people follow the rule of kings and queens and like why do we have this hierarchical like acceptance ladder? Like, why should I say yes to it? Why would soldiers just go and actually like listen to a king's word and act upon it, even though sometimes it's not fair? Why are people constrained by he's my boss? But I remember at one point, I go back to my own side of the story. I ran a restaurant with other companies and like with other different kind of businesses in Liberia. One of them was the restaurant was the main one. I was always there, and I tried to like kind of like open different companies and invest differently and explore different parts of the economy from that space. Not the best of ideas, by the way, because like you can't. I don't know. You focus on one thing, it has a higher chance of success. If you're just kind of like jumping back and forth, you're gonna have to like energy is gonna be consumed from one thing to another. And I remember once I was like talking to somebody and I was like, this is what we're going to do. And he looked at me and he said yes, but he didn't do it. And then I went around and I was like, why didn't you do it? He goes like, I didn't want to, but he'll do it. He said he'll do it. And I believed him. And after the fourth time, him not doing it, I actually went to him and I was like, you know what, man? It seems like you're doing it on purpose. So we prepared the paperwork and we decided to fire him, and he refused to get fired. And at that point, I was like, people could actually refuse not to get fired. I didn't know. I called my lawyer, and then my lawyer was like, we could get involved, we can get the law, but like, ultimately, how are we going to deal with it? And suddenly I realized this could escalate to like, it's literally like my own company slash restaurant, and somebody is imposing on it, right? That's how I felt. I felt I was treated unfairly. But then he had that power in him and he could go anywhere he wants. And literally, the illusion of society is what kind of allowed me to think that, sure, I could fire this guy and he has to, like, kind of like just go and exist somewhere else or live his life. But for him, he made a decision that he's not going to do it. And I have to reconsider. Eventually, he got convinced, but it didn't make sense to him why he would, like, agree to what I was saying, even though I own the company and I own the property and all that stuff. It kind of showed that all of these things were illusions, but it also showed like just because I was the guy in charge did not really mean I was. Because, in all honesty, if I was in charge from the first time I asked him to do something, he should have done it. But I wasn't in charge, was I? He was. And he did exactly what he wanted for a long time and got me into like a whole lot of just at work. It was just like frustrating working around and like trying to like tiptoe around what's going on. It did feel tyrannical at one point, but people have a will of their own, and we choose to always kind of like engage with the world the way we want. And most of us are conditioned, whether we like it or not, whether directly by the people in our lives or by what we observe out of life. So, what does commanding like a king mean? What does it mean for me to take command of my life or take command of or leadership of others? What does interacting with the world as if a king is interacting with the world? What are the things that a sovereign, somebody who's in charge of his own self or herself, sovereignty over myself, what does okay, so the image of a king is the image of kind of like responsibility, I guess, leadership, respect, trust, honor, and all that kind of stuff. That's the image. There are stories of good and bad kings and all that good stuff. We normally only hear about the bad kings. But what does that responsibility mean? Sovereignty, being in charge, taking full responsibility and full control. What does it mean when you're looking at yourself and actually like commanding and having people listen? Starting with yourself, you're the first person that has to listen to yourself. Because ultimately, the first person you're commanding is yourself. And the way you command yourself, and they say that actually in speech, the way you command yourself in public is how the public will treat you. And maybe what they mean is because you are your own king until you decide to be kind of like somebody else, until you decide to follow some other king or have some other king basically follow you. And but that's making me think a lot more on from a structural, I don't know, like again from a like what does power really mean when people kind of like choose to follow you versus when they're forced to follow you? How did people agree to monarchies in the past? What is it that kings possessed or just I want to say the peasants didn't or the commoners didn't? What does it mean to actually command with full responsibility? To be in tune with what's going on around you, with your environment, with the people that are following you, the people you're responsible for. What does it mean when you're reflecting on your own self and slowly showing the world how capable you are? I'm assuming commanding like a king is a representation of being capable, sovereignty, sovereignty over oneself, one's mind, one's body, one's emotions, one's feelings, one's heart, one's soul. And that's basically, I'm guessing that's us, kind of like, that's freedom, right? Isn't it? It goes back to how I started this video. The guy was discussing, like, if I treat myself like a king and I engage as a king would, then everything around me will follow suit. I think the guy was really talking about his own sovereignty. And I think that's what people get attracted to. That kind of like, I want to say charisma, maybe, but that self-control, maybe, or handling of the self in a strong way that allows people to just move through the world differently, move through La La Land differently. Sovereignty, something I really need to think about. Sovereignty. Yalla guys, this is a video.